you talked about the military guys, they keep going. There's a strategy in ultra running, in the multi-day ultra running sphere, where you take a nap, and Courtney has talked about this, took a nap for 2 minutes, and I fell asleep one time for a minute, and I woke, my brother was pacing me, I woke up and I said, how long was I asleep? And he's like, 1 minute. And your brain resets, your body resets. That 1 or 2 minutes, you're good to go again. I mean, so I heard you say the military guys, they just push through, but can you explain that 1 or 2 minute nap and why that feels like you just did a control, delete, reset? Mm-hmm. How does that work?
Yeah, I'm obsessed with this kind of stuff because for those that, have followed me or that haven't, I'm big on helping people get their sleep right. Because sleep is the ultimate reset for endurance and life, right? But I'm a big proponent of things like non-sleep deep rest, which is similar to an ancient practice called yoga nidra, where you lie down, you deliberately stay awake, but you relax your body and you try and get your brain out of thinking and doing and more into just pure sensation. Sometimes people fall asleep. This done for 10 minutes or 20 minutes can partially offset some of the effects of sleep deprivation. But we know naps work too. Now what we're talking about is very, very short naps. What happens when you're sleep deprived and you take one of those mental micro naps, or let's just call it a micro nap, is no doubt the brain goes into a state of sleep that's much deeper than it normally would had you, been on a more standard schedule of awake for 12 to 16 hours or something, and going to sleep. So what you're getting is a bunch of sleep-like stuff in that very compact time frame.
Okay.
Now, what's happening there? Okay, well, we know that fatigue and sleepiness comes from the buildup of a molecule called adenosine. Incidentally, caffeine interrupts the adenosine system, so you don't feel that sleepiness. Then the caffeine wears off and that adenosine hits those receptors and you feel extra sleepy. But no doubt in those short micro naps, some adenosine is being cleared. We also know that there's a bunch of changes in the neurons themselves. Those, what we call ion channels, a potassium, sodium thing gets altered, let's say, in sleep. It's about altering the amount of potassium in and outside of the cells. In naps, you adjust some of that. So when you are really tired and you kind of do that little micro nap, you wake up and you're like, I feel better. What's going on there? Well, it's a very compact replenishment of some of the cellular and kind of whole body things like clearance of adenosine, changes those the amount of potassium inside and outside the cell, these kinds of things. Now, are you clearing all that adenosine away in 1 minute? No. But no doubt there's a more rapid clearance than would normally occur in 1 minute of sleep. There's also something very powerful, and this is the reason I mentioned non-sleep deep rest. There's also something very powerful about just letting your mind go idle for a period of time. From the time you wake up until you go to sleep at night, you're in what I call DPOs. You're doing duration path outcome. You're trying to figure out what to say next, what to do next. You're trying to get to that milestone. You're trying to navigate through your day. When you go into one of those 1 minute micro naps or you do a non-sleep deep rest, you're essentially shutting down all that planning. What's planning? The prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex we talked about earlier is this very dynamic strategy setting system. So like we're here in my yard, we have a strategy, we have a plan, and we're carrying out that plan. The moment you get in your car, you have a different strategy plan to get where you need to go, and so on and so forth. The prefrontal cortex is involved in all of that dynamic planning. And when you run, as we were talking about before, prefrontal cortex is going to be engaged. This is important when you actually have to plan milestones. But there's also that beautiful part of endurance running. Not what I would consider myself an endurance runner, but I try and ruck along on Sundays, and I ran cross country a bit to know that there are those times when you just went 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you weren't planning anything. You're just cruising, and you're just in the sensation of running. And I would argue that when you're doing that, when any of us are doing that, we are allowing our prefrontal cortex to go slightly offline. Okay, it's always online to some extent, but slightly offline. Rest a little bit. So this is rest while moving. Okay, this is rest while in effort. So this is another kind of drawer in the cupboard of option. Sorry, this is another cupboard in the options of ways to push through. So you can plan milestones, but that's planning. That requires that prefrontal cortex. Okay, I'm gonna do this, then I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna do this. So it's like the list that people cross off during the day. But then there's the just running, not thinking about anything. And we know that allows the brain to some areas of the brain to get some quote unquote rest during those times. So I would argue that provided one doesn't go off track, off course, provided that one is staying with their pace, the more that one can rest while in effort, the more resources you're conserving. What resources are we talking about? We're not talking about caloric energy at the level of muscles. We're talking about caloric energy and neural energy.
Right.
Okay, which sounds kind of woo, neural energy. No, but think about most of our metabolic needs each day are for brain function. So the ability to just let the brain idle a little bit in certain areas is energy conservation. And so that's got to play in also. So we're not just talking about a vehicle that can like milestone go, push through, endure. It's also about knowing when to hit. Like in a vehicle, you know, and then you get up in those higher RPMs, and then what does a good transmission allow you to do?
Yeah.
And you can go the same speed, right, at lower RPM.
A couple different things there too. What I've noticed on the road, you can turn that off, the frontal cortex, I guess, kind of get into a groove. We're not really thinking. You're just cruising. Those miles come easy, you know, because you turn that off. And so it's just in the mountains much tougher because every step has to be calculated. That's why, like in the mountains, that your nervous system seems like it's firing all the time because you're correcting and you're anticipating footfalls and things like that. It happens fast. But I wonder if Courtney can turn that off even in those situations, because I remember I saw her when she was going for the Colorado Trail Records, middle of the night, she's running and she fell asleep. She was running.
While running.
And Maggie, who was with us too, is a great ultra runner herself. We were all three running that night, and Maggie caught her because she's going to go off right off and there's a cliff. So she had, I don't know what happened. I don't know if she was so tired or was whatever, but she actually fell asleep and just like, she caught her like that. So that's pretty fascinating.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've never been out to SEAL team training, but friends that have been through it successfully told me that, you know, there's multiple points where people start hallucinating.
Yeah.
People fall asleep, you know, right before people fall asleep like that from sleep deprivation, they're going to start hallucinating.
And she does hallucinate.
Yeah. They'll start hallucinating. I mean, you can make anybody legitimately psychotic by sleep depriving them. The brain just does not want to go there. Right. It will go there, but it doesn't want to go there. And if it does, you'll start hallucinating. I mean, if you've ever been in a late night conversation with someone and you start nodding off, and typically you start saying things that don't make any sense first. You know, we've all been there. Yeah. And it's kind of funny, and then you're gone. Right. So, yeah, as you mentioned, when you're running on terrain where you really have to pay attention, that's multiple what I would call DPOs, duration path outcome. Is a lot of involvement in the prefrontal cortex. Got to step here, got to step there. That's also what happens when you're paying attention to an injury. Like, got to keep your gait a certain way to stay off that thing, you know, to stay off that pain in the right leg or whatever it is, because it's just constant strategy implementation. Remember, if we just step back for a second and we just say, like, what does the brain do? Well, it's got a bunch of parts that connect to the body. They're involved in keeping us breathing, keeping our heart rate going, keeping our digestion, what we call autonomic or automatic functions. And then it's got a bunch of brain areas involved in memory and perception of, you know, sounds and sights and smells and tastes, etc. And then it's got the thinking and planning stuff that takes our memories, takes what's going on now, and can move us through our current goal or life. You know, perhaps the most demanding, metabolically demanding aspect of all that is the autonomic stuff, because it's always ticking in the background, keeping us alive, and the thinking and planning stuff. Now, when we engage in some intense learning, or we're really trying to dial in and pay attention and, you know, really, really extract information and use that information quickly, you know, metabolic needs in the brain go way, way up, understandably. But when out on a long run, you know, there are going to be times, I'm guessing, if we were to, unfortunately can't do this experiment because the person's moving, but if you were to measure brain activity in different areas, I'm guessing that certain areas are going to be very active during the strategy and planning phases, and then less active. And then the brain, when you're in a kind of a, I don't know, people like to talk about flow states, but when you're not thinking too much about the effort required and you're actually engaging in the effort beautifully for purposes of that race or what have you, well then metabolic activity in the brain is going to be overall slightly lower. So all of these things are playing into endurance.